There are some shows that don't just entertain you, they settle into your life so quietly you almost don't notice when they become part of you. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. For years, the new Yankee workshop was that kind of presence. A steady voice in the background, a calm, almost reassuring rhythm. The soft sound of wood being shaped, cut, fitted together into something that would last. No rush, no chaos. Just patience, skill, and the quiet satisfaction of building something real with your own hands. And at the center of it all was Norm Abram, measured, thoughtful, consistent in a way that felt rare. Week after week, nothing seemed to change. The workshop doors opened, the project began, and by the end, something meaningful existed where nothing had before. It wasn't just about the final piece. It was about the process, the care, the time it took to get there. It felt reliable, predictable in the best possible way. And then, one day, it wasn't there anymore. No moment that reached everyone at once. No goodbye that felt complete. No single explanation that made it easy to understand. For many people, it didn't even feel like an ending at first. Just a pause, a break in the rhythm, but the pause stretched and stretched until it became something else. The doors stayed closed, the silence settled in. And the more people looked back, the more questions began to surface, quietly at first, then more persistently. Because something like that doesn't just disappear without a reason. Not something that steady. And once you begin to ask why, you start to realize the answer isn't simple. It never was. Before it became a quiet mystery, it was something much more grounded. A man, a workshop, and a way of explaining things that made even the most detailed work feel within reach. The new Yankee workshop never relied on noise or spectacle. It didn't chase attention. It didn't need fast cuts or dramatic moments to hold people in place. Its strength came from something far more difficult to create: clarity. There was a calm confidence in the way Norm Abram worked. Every step had intention, every tool had a purpose, every movement felt considered, not rushed, and every project carried a quiet story about patience, precision, and care. For the people watching, it wasn't only about learning how to build furniture. It was about something deeper. It was about feeling like you could. Like maybe if you slowed down enough, if you paid attention, if you gave something your full focus, you could take something raw and turn it into something meaningful. That feeling mattered. Because the world outside didn't move like that, the world rushed, it pushed, it demanded speed, but inside that workshop everything slowed down. It reminded people that not everything has to happen quickly, that some things are worth doing carefully. That time, when used with intention, can create something lasting. And over the years, that rhythm became familiar, comforting, the kind of presence you don't question because it always feels like it will be there, waiting exactly where you left it. But behind that calm surface, like with most things that appear simple, there were layers that didn't show themselves easily. Decisions being made, changes unfolding. Realities that existed just outside the frame. And slowly, almost invisibly, those unseen parts began shaping an ending that no one fully expected. For a long time, everything about the show felt steady, almost untouched by change. It had found its place, its audience, its identity. There was no need to reinvent anything. No pressure to chase trends or adjust to what was popular at the moment. It existed in its own space, separate from everything else happening in television. And that separation became its strength. People knew what they were getting: a clear process, a calm voice, a finished piece that felt earned, not rushed or forced. Behind the scenes, that same sense of order existed. Production followed a rhythm. Projects were chosen carefully. Nothing felt accidental or out of place. And at the center, Norm Abram remained the anchor that held everything together. There was trust in him, not just as a host, but as someone who genuinely understood his craft. Someone who wasn't performing knowledge, but living it. That kind of authenticity is rare. And even harder to replace. For years, that balance held. There was no feeling that the show was moving toward an ending, no signal that it was temporary. If anything, it felt permanent. Like something that would always exist in the background, steady and unchanged. But stability, even when it lasts a long time, doesn't mean nothing is shifting. Sometimes the biggest changes happen slowly, quietly, in the background where no one is really looking. And that's how this story began to move, not with disruption, but with subtle change that was easy to miss until it was. The first signs didn't come as a clear signal anyone could point to. There was no single moment where everything shifted. No announcement that explained what was happening. Instead, it came through a quiet realization that didn't fully form all at once. The world of television was changing. The way people watched, the way content was delivered, the pace everything moved at, it was all shifting. Faster formats, shorter attention spans, a constant push toward immediacy. And shows like the new Yankee Workshop existed in a completely different rhythm. They weren't designed for speed, they were built on patience. According to reports over time, this shift in the media landscape began to create pressure. Not something viewers could easily see, but something that existed behind the scenes. Production costs began to matter more. Distribution started to change. Audience habits evolved. On their own, none of these felt strong enough to end something so established. But together, they began to carry weight. At the same time, there was something else that couldn't be ignored: time, because while the show felt constant, life outside of it didn't stand still. Years passed, priorities changed. The idea of continuing indefinitely became more complicated than it once seemed. And when those two forces come together, the world changing outside and reflection happening inside, they create a moment where something has to be reconsidered. Not suddenly, but in a way that feels inevitable once you see it clearly. As those changes continued, the tension didn't explode into something dramatic. It stayed quiet. The kind of tension that builds slowly without confrontation. The show still worked, people still watched, the identity remained strong, nothing was broken. But maintaining that level of consistency takes effort, constant effort, and over time, even meaningful effort begins to feel different. Especially when everything around it is moving in another direction. For the new Yankee Workshop, the challenge wasn't failure, it was something more subtle. Relevance in a world that was changing faster than it ever had before. Not because the content had lost value, but because the way people engaged with that content had shifted. At the same time, there was a personal layer to all of this, because behind every long-running show is a person who has carried it year after year. For Norm Abram, this wasn't just work. It was a commitment, and commitments, especially ones that last decades, carry weight, not negative, but real, the kind of weight that builds quietly over time. The question eventually changes. It's no longer just whether something can continue. It becomes whether it should. And that's where the tension deepens in a way that isn't visible from the outside. Because stepping away from something successful, even when it feels right, is never simple. When the end finally came, it didn't feel like a collapse. There was no sense of something falling apart. It arrived quietly, with a kind of finality that didn't need to announce itself loudly. The show concluded its run, not because it had failed, not because people had stopped caring, but because the moment had come. According to available accounts, the decision reflected a combination of factors. The changing media environment, the natural passage of time, and a growing sense that continuing in the same way no longer aligned with everything else that had changed. And that distinction matters. Because it shifts how the ending is understood. This wasn't something taken away, it was something that reached its natural conclusion. But for the people watching, that understanding doesn't always ease the feeling, because what they experienced wasn't completion, it was absence. The workshop that had always been there was suddenly not, and there was no single moment where everyone could process it together, no shared goodbye. Just the quiet realization that something familiar had ended. And sometimes, those are the endings that stay with you the longest, because they don't give you closure, they leave you with questions. What makes this story stay with people isn't just the ending, it's how it happened. There was no single cause, no one moment you can point to and say this is why. It was layers, industry shifts, personal decisions, the natural movement of time, all coming together in a way that feels difficult to define. For many viewers, the show was never just about woodworking. It was about something slower, something more focused, a reminder that not everything needs to be rushed. And when something like that disappears, it leaves more than just an empty space on a schedule. It leaves a feeling. For Norm Abram, the story doesn't end with the show itself. His work, his approach, his influence, they continue in different ways. But the specific space that the new Yankee Workshop created, that was unique. And once something unique ends, it doesn't simply restart somewhere else. It becomes part of memory, part of a time that can't be recreated in the same way again. And that's where the weight of it settles, not just in loss, but in understanding that some things are meant to exist for a certain time and then quietly step away. There is something deeply human about the way this story unfolds. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is, we expect endings to be clear. To come with explanations, with moments we can point to and understand. But real life doesn't always offer that. Sometimes things end quietly, without conflict, without a single turning point. And maybe that's why this one stays with people, because it reflects something familiar, the idea that even the most steady parts of life are still temporary. That consistency doesn't guarantee permanence, And that change, even when it feels sudden, has often been building long before we notice it. The workshop didn't vanish overnight. It slowly reached a point where continuing no longer made sense in the same way, and that isn't failure, it's something else, a different kind of completion. But for those who watched, who learned, who found comfort in that quiet rhythm, it still feels like something ended too soon. Or maybe just too quietly. If this made you think about the shows, the routines, or the moments that quietly became part of your life, take a moment and sit with that feeling. Not everything leaves with a clear goodbye. Some things simply fade, and you only realize what they meant after they're gone. Share your thoughts below. What do you think really causes something steady to suddenly come to an end? And if you value stories that look beneath the surface, stories that try to understand what isn't immediately visible, consider staying connected for more like this.